Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. So get rid of all the filth and evil in your lives and humbly accept the word God has planted in your hearts, for it has the power to save your souls. But don't just listen to God's word, you must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it is like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God will bless you for doing it. If you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself and your religion is worthless. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. This is true and can be trusted.
Jim was a rounder. You never knew what Jim was going to say, what Jim was going to do. And one time, this was years ago, back when Meredith and I had just first gotten married. Jim had a season of life to where, for a living, he sold imitation sunglasses. Now, we laugh about this, and you can kind of roll your eyes, but let's time machine, and let's remember how important that pair of fake Oakleys was in the summer of 1997. You know, that was a very legitimate thing. But so Jim's on a tear one night, and Jim kind of got on a tear. His nickname was Disco Jim, so you can imagine this guy was a lot of fun. But he was on a tear one night, kind of on the soapbox, and he was complaining that his vocation, that his industry was being destroyed, and that he was having massive problems with supply chain because the government's cracked down on Al-Qaeda. Now, we kind of laughed about it. We thought about, okay, Jim, you're connecting some dots. And you ever experienced two things that are related that you would never imagine are related? Because after this soapbox one night, like 6-8 months down the road, I'm cruising the internet, looking at news, and lo and behold, I find some article about how the government is cracking down on the financial side of global terror. This is like 2007, 2008, like back in then. The government's cracking down on global terror by eliminating the money laundering schemes that organizations like Hamas and Al-Qaeda had to wash their money. And the primary way they washed their money was fake sunglasses and fake purses. You know, you never realize the things that are connected that we wouldn't expect to be connected. This morning, Claudia read this passage from James that we've been in for the last couple of weeks and we'll stay in. But, you know, two things that are connected that we don't think would be connected. James talks about anger. I don't think anybody in here would say necessarily that anger is always a good thing. It's not this beneficial thing that we have in our lives. But we probably don't realize that what James is talking about here, that what he's trying to do is trying to connect anger to something that's much bigger that we might not initially think about it. We also don't realize that there's a connection between James, the half-brother of Jesus. I had somebody ask me last week, said, hey, my kid asked me, did like Mary have an extra boyfriend or something? And I was like, no, okay. So, you know, Mary, Jesus' mother, Joseph, earthly father, Jesus, fully divine, fully man. That's how that operation works. So for my little friends this morning, kind of understand that. But we don't realize this connection between James, the half-brother of Jesus, and like 3 Roman emperors in a row either. But there's this deep level of why this anger message matters so much to James. And he's not just saying, okay, this is a behavior you might want to try to eliminate in your life, but he's saying, no, this is a pretty crucial thing for what does it mean to be a Christian. Now, James began leading the Jerusalem church about 40 AD, so pretty early on in the story of the church. And you know, as the church is growing in Jerusalem, a few other things are happening. You know, the first is that in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was ruled by this string of Roman governors and sometimes some appointed Jewish leaders. We've heard the name Herod in some of the Jesus stories before, so members of his dynasty and his family. But Herod and his family were also all tied up with Rome. And there's all sorts of weird stories about incest and about favoritism, about promises, and all these multiple gifts that go back and forth because ruling Jerusalem became this favored gift of the Roman emperor. And whoever ruled Jerusalem was able to appoint the high priest. Now, this all just sounds like a bunch of random information right now, I know. But the high priest was this weird, like, combined political and religious position that every couple of years was flipped and that a new person became the high priest. And it's really difficult for us to understand all these different factions that were in Jerusalem at the time in the 50s and in the 60s AD that were all just trying to find and gain power over each other. And James was ultimately assassinated in 62 AD by one of these ruling patterns. They threw him off the pinnacle of the temple. I have a picture of this right now, Dylan. So like that peak of that right there, like that gives you an idea of this is the same place where when Satan took Jesus to the temple and offered him the whole world. It's the exact same place. It's here. So I took this picture a couple of years ago. I'm standing at the bottom of what's called the Kidron Valley. Does that look like a fun fall to anybody? It's like that wall is about 150 feet tall, and there's a lot of terrain between there. So this one person that he had been the high priest, and there was no emperor at the time, and then the Roman governor at the time had died, and so there were several different Roman politicians that wanted to be the governor. There were several different these ruling people inside of Jerusalem that they wanted power over Jerusalem, and in order to try to gain what this one person thought would be the power he would need to continue being the high priest, he decided to assassinate James, and they threw him off the roof of this. Only problem was he didn't die. So imagine they're up there, James is thrown down, they're watching, he lives through the fall, and they realize, well, we got to go kill him. And they've got to take a hike down from the temple all the way to the bottom of the valley, and they beat James to death with clubs. So if you think the Bible's boring, just read it. You find that out the other way. But, all of this astounded people so much because of who James was. Now, this sounds like a lot of random information I just gave you, but this is what's going on. James was seen by many people, especially different groups of the Jewish leaders, as the glue that held Jerusalem together. The Pharisees, who were Jesus' enemy, the ones who got Jesus killed, they were on the side of James. Like they wanted to keep James alive. It was one of these kind of groups of people that was part of this big, huge argument. But they would talk about James